Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. Now, the unfortunate news that Val, the movie star Kilmer, who portrayed Jim and Batman Morrison, in addition to being the star of Top Gun, passed away at age 65, when it was revealed that the death of Val Kilmer rocked Hollywood, stopped to think as well as to weep on a man who dedicated himself to each and every from Doc Holliday to Jim Morrison. Kilmer didn't simply pretend to vanish into his characters, although he always plays one part felt distinct and far away. Val Kilmer was untouchable before, to his passing, finally verified Batman's veracity forever, and no one expected it to. It wasn't the critics as anticipated. There was more weight to the pressure. He was instructed to conceal a burden. He brought in silence, forced me to conceal this at one point. Told a pal in a whisper that it was about a dream. That turned into a jail, and the unspoken price of being the caped advocate and the bat suit was the first item that everyone had forgotten about Batman in the middle of. The Gotham world was changing in the 1990s. Famously, Michael Keaton had hung up the cape following Batman's return and departure from a business that was rapidly altering course with Tim. The director Burton is also reversing Warner's. The brothers were looking for something new, more dazzling, more marketable. And Joel Schumacher, a kid-friendly substitute, took over-the-top use of a brighter palette, adversaries, as well as a new Dark Knight Val in actuality. Kilmer wasn't the obvious pick. Most folks didn't even know about him. Warner Brothers, however, required a star with exceptional acting abilities, someone who could bear the emotional intricacy of Bruce Wayne, while continuing to appeal to younger viewers. Kilmer, fresh from The Doors and Tombstone's Triumph, had the ideal balance of charisma and edge. But putting oneself in Batman's shoes was not Kilmer's routine. Challenge was as follows: a beloved Keaton character whose enigmatic and the reticent portrayal had captured audiences. The strain wasn't limited to box office results. It was approximately Warner Brothers created that legacy. It was obvious that they required a Batman who might sell out movie theaters and toy stores. Tie-ins between fast food and goods branding. Kilmer was more than simply a performer now. Served as the focal point of a billion-dollar, behind-the-scenes marketing machine. Kilmer had a strong commitment to truly agree to the position without reading the screenplay, primarily because of his respect for Schumacher, who collaborated with him on The Saint, before Kilmer believed Schumacher's vision in 1997, and was certain that he could provide something specific to the position. Even Kilmer, without the script in hand, examined the character using the gravity of a Shakespearean character, Hewish to investigate Bruce's dualism. Wayne, the rich orphan icon. But he soon started to become aware that there was less space available for interpretation, as well as increased demand for spectacle. The film company desired Batman Toycon rather than Batman the Guy, in spite of Batman Forever, was an enormous triumph, bringing in more over $300 million globally and rekindled popular curiosity in Warner Brothers franchise. Kilmer had performed his duties by wearing the suit, aided and delivered the lines. Make a blockbuster, but it doesn't guarantee success. Always provide the complete story on what the cameras failed to record. What the interviews never touched was the way Therill started to choke Kilmer, as each the day on set turned into a struggle, not with villains or antics, but without speaking, a knees and a feeling of erasing due. When anything went wrong, it all began with the element that established the position. The cowl conceals the suit itself. The bat costume was initially a symbol of truth, of victory, a childhood fantasy fulfilled. For the mature Val Kilmer, superhero idolization felt like a full-circle moment. An opportunity to enter the myth, to fulfill a dream that few people ever touch. When he initially saw their cognizable suit shimmering in the studio lights that made him feel awed, proud and powerful, child in front of the most amazing present. But that emotion passed as soon as he changed the outfit by putting it on something created for cinematic effect and visual impact. Flair was amazing to observe, but a terrible to wear, weighing more than 50 lb and composed of tough, thick rubber. It immediately changed Kilmer from performer to take the cowl. Prisoner limited the movement of his head and chest. His breath was squashed by the plate. and the boots caused walking stiffly and awkwardly. The outfit had no sweat-soaked heat, was trapped by the ventilation, had left him exhausted and wet by lunchtime, and worse, he was unable to. Soon, people will be able to hear or communicate clearly. Ceased communicating with him, which he later characterized as being extremely isolating, since he would subsequently characterize it as acting from within a casket. Kilmer, renowned for putting himself in the shoes of characters, he isolated himself from the very feelings he was employed to convey. Unable to express emotions with face, his voice was muffled, his facial gestures, movements were restricted tostiff turns and awkward motions. That he also attempted to get Bruce Wayne to life, the more the suit buried him, that no one was supposed to define him. Seems to realize that the staff admired the costume's appearance on camera. Producers gave its silhouette Warner high marks. Brothers was ecstatic about the Batman's potential for merchandise. Was all over cereal boxes and lunch boxes. The image of billboards and action figures. Kilmer's suit was a worldwide feeling. But the man whose inside invisible, there was a single, cutting instant, more profound than the others, which he never forgot. The multi-billionaire investor, Warren Buffett, an entrepreneur, had brought his one afternoon. The grandchildren took the set. The Buffett was a huge hit, and everyone was thrilled. Even in Hollywood, Kilmer, completely decked out and towering in his Batman in costume, was ready to greet them. As when the kids got there, they gasped. With joy, they rushed toward him, their eyes wide, voices rising, but there was a sense alienating him by not communicating. To me, Kilmer later said, they were conversing with the suit. The kids touched the bat and circled him in awe, Symbol tapping the utility belt, admiring the armor, but they never looked him in the eye without saying anything. Hi, they didn't inquire about, talk to Batman rather than Val, which was Once he realized he wasn't playing, he was dressed as Batman, and nor regardless of what he did or how hard he attempted to give the part some soul. If it ever made it to the screen, it would all be disguised as his nuance would never be the focus of performance or feeling or intricacy. It would be regarding camera, posture, and silhouette angles he had previously used to depict a human nature to become an exalted mannequin. I became aware that I was only an actress. Nothing more, he said, in a suit, and it was annoying until I understood that my function in the movie was merely to appear and where I was instructed to stand for the physical. The emotional toll from the tension was wearing thin. Even worse, he'd return home after a long days of painful skin and shooting shoulders, massaged wounded ears that were ringing from spending hours, whispered conversation. He was unable to hear. Yes, he was unable to connect with his. There were no co-stars, the way. He desired only restriction in the function of freedom, remained silent and signed contracts. Promotions were planned, and he was employed to accomplish, and Warner Brothers clarified. Batman had to seem invincible. They forced me to hide my untouchable perfection. Kilmer acknowledged this near the conclusion of his. They advised me not to discuss life, not to express the true feelings to others. Avoiding destroying the illusion was lucrative, sleek, and marketable. But it was expensive, and Kilmer endured it by himself, observing as he grinned when Batman Forever became popular. He autographed the toys during the interviews, but inside, he was breaking down the suit's weight, had done more than just cause him to get bruises, had broken a piece of his spirit. That once thought playing Batman would feel as though you were flying instead of plummeting, so when the opportunity to Batman and Robin's sequel, he refused to not out of spite, but rather out of conceit. Thus, he was unable to confront the suit once more. He was unable to be the quiet shadow that hollowed-out hero he'd imagined become Batman, and after he was eager to get away from him, the disintegration of a fantasy in the eyes of the Batman Forever was a public triumph. When The Dark Knight returned, it flew at the movie theater, made more than $330 million. Fans from all over the world turned up in force. Theaters were humming with anticipation, and children departed performances, pleading for Warner Brothers' celebrated Batman toys. The director, Joel Schumacher, embraced the campy, neon-soaked tone of the movie, and Val Kilmer, wearing one of the most iconic, the world's most amazing superhero suit, was abruptly everywhere. But Kilmer's triumph rung hollow as he should have satisfied. He arrived at the summit of the mountain, created a legacy and fulfilled the dream in every way. A comic book-wielding child had amused. But each night, he gazed into hotel mirrors, pondering the reason behind his feelings, empty why he was guaranteed such a position. It seemed like it had consumed everything. It was more than just the weight of the suit. It was the change in mindset. Batman had always been plagued by, represented resilience, control, and mystery, but Kilmer had left him playing, feeling helpless, confined, and invisible. He felt less like a superhero than he actually was, like a man yelling in a quiet under layers, his voice unheard in the room of studio standards and molded rubber. He was Batman to the world, but he was disappearing behind the moments where the surroundings weren't always supportive. There was a lot of pressure, was anticipated to cover the gap left by Michael Keaton, wins over an ardent admirer base, and fulfill a laser-focused studio on profit. Every action was carefully considered. He practiced every smile, but he couldn't even express his displeasure with the suit or the task without being classified as challenging. He remained silent once more, but silence had a Kilmer started to dislike, the very something he used to want in place of. I'm eager to become the caped when I wake up. Crusader, he started to fear. Every day of filming the litigation didn't give him more authority, took away from him the artwork he cherished. There was no space for improvisation, for susceptibility to behaving in every scene had a concealed expression, centered on the way the costume moved in a different way and wasn't being asked to be Batman in order to resemble him. He endured, as professionals do. However, after the production was over, Head departed Gotham carrying a heavy love. The rumors of a Batman sequel and Robin became more vocal, as the studio desired returned him. But by then, something within Kilmer had silently and totally broken. He wasn't furious or resentful. Instead, he was worn out, at which point he made the Hollywood was startled by his move, which he would not give back the formal explanation provided to. There were schedule conflicts for the press. Neat, ambiguous explanation that kept in actuality. Kilmer had made assolent promise to himself that he would never again. He gave up his identity for what it seems that the experience had changed. He didn't act like stardom was meant to, yet in more profound and eerie ways, and he provided clues in later interviews that I didn't. He once said, "Batman, quit me." He refrained from discussing it for years, went on to work on other projects, some successful people he didn't rediscover. His passion for using theatre to express stories on his own words, but the spectre of the Batsuit followed him in and remained. Fan mail interviews at a random airport, conversations in which strangers would still. He would smile courteously if you called him Batman. He always did, although he carried within the hidden significance of the role's actions. Only in his last years dealing with the deterioration of his condition, considering his path, did he eventually start to talk, not to destroy something, but to be truthful in order, to release himself from that illusion. "They forced me to conceal this," he stated. "You weren't permitted to even off-screen break the character, particularly if that figure sold billions of dollars worth of goods." The throat had caused the voice to become raspy cancer, but his remarks had more clarity than ever before. "I still adored Batman but it taught me that dreams can occasionally come true, and they continue to break you." Val Kilmer once wanted to be Batman, but he had not thought he would almost lose Val Kilmer. That insight did not lessen his legacy. It became more profound because the man beneath the hero's mask paid few people ever saw the price when the suit played on his personal connection to the position that was. And further obstacle Kilmer had to defeated, and it wouldn't be as Val. Kilmer found it easy to beat the legend himself at a special juncture, particularly in Michael's shadow. Keaton's famous depiction of the figure from the first two Batman depicts Kilmer's trip to the dawn. Initially, he didn't wear a cape and cowl. Eagerly after, yet he was placed under tremendous pressure to not only meet both to honor Keaton's heritage and to please a fan base who had developed a strong bond with Batman's previous. Keaton had turned into a liked among fans because of his darker, more gloomy portrayal of the Batman character Batman Returns 1992, and 1989, the portrayal was virtually legendary, and supporters fiercely guarded Heiser caped Crusader variant, so when Kilmer was chosen to play Batman's replacement, high standards were set, and there was a substantial chance of offending fans who considered Keaton to be an indispensable Kilmer, but was fully conscious of this difficulty. Later on, he acknowledged feeling extremely pressure to take over Keaton's role, particularly with the franchise's large fan base excitedly anticipating. The pressure in the following installment was both internal and external. Kilmer had consistently been a person willing to accept positions that provided depth and intricacy, whereas Keaton's Batman received a lot of acclaim for its reflective and tormented depiction of Kilmer's interpretation of the Dark Knight, has to combine that heritage with the additional tone that is playful and daring that Joel Schumacher, the director, had vision for Batman. Forever Kilmer soon discovered that this was not a simple task, particularly taking into account the high standards pertaining to his on-set performance. Kilmer was both intimidated and unmotivated by his fellow performers, especially Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey, and Jones and Nicole Kidman's Carrey were renowned for having a larger-than-life performances that provide an almost showing enthusiasm for their positions as the Kilmer, Riddler, and Two-Face, respectively. However, was constrained by the restrictions on the Batman costume that was infamously stiff and painful, making him feel constrained in his. However, co-stars appeared to flourish within the extravagant style of the movie free from the physical limitations of their outfits, which Kilmer recognized that, in contrast, his function frequently felt like it needed more action, but less introspection and greater nuance. In spite of this, Kilmer managed to give the part more dimension. He thought Batman's complex mental state should not be eclipsed by the colorful, explosive quality of Kilmer's film Batman. Bruce Wayne was more susceptible, compared to Keaton's struggles with themes of personal development and family reconciliation. He performed the part with a specific amount of restraint, which some people applauded, but others have chastised you for not living up to the more dramatic depictions that had appeared earlier. But Batman Forever was regarded as a change from the darker tones of Kilmer's predecessors. Batman's portrayal received a mixed response. Some people valued his more empathetic portrayal of the character, while others wanted to get back to the real world. They had learned about the evil Batman. In any case, Kilmer's performance was entry to strike a compromise between fans' demands and the changing course of the silence throughout time and the history of the franchise. Val Kilmer's life took a number of sudden twists, each of which pushed him more distant from the Batman character that had previously characterized his career. After Batman's turbulent experience, Kilmer gradually retreated from the spotlight, not in a bold attempt to privacy, yet in a silent pursuit of tranquility. New actors emerged, and the world had changed. Everyone is bringing their own Batsuit interpretation of the Dark Knight of Gotham. However, Kilmer's interpretation of the role remained in the communal consciousness. Considered by many to be a part of a special time in the history of Batman's movies, as much as fans valued his, Kilmer's contribution was no longer eager to live under the shadow of. He had distanced himself from that persona, the grind in Hollywood, but it was more than a yearning for independence. It was necessary to claim his individuality and Kilmer's enthusiasm. For his acting, he never stopped perform, but he came back more selectively, back to his theatre beginnings, where he could express oneself without being restricted. He worked on a superhero outfit, initiatives that gave him a breath of fresh air, bringing his own characters to life, personalities that he may actually possess, but as acted honestly during his time in the Batsuit continued to be an implicit aspect of his style, of something he had buried in a deep sense. It wasn't until later, while he continues to struggle with his throat, Kilmer started talking about cancer, openly discussing the encounter that he was both formed and damaged. The years had given him the opportunity to contemplate, and the insight that followed had to speak the truth at last. He realized, felt no longer the need to keep Warner safe. Batman's image, or his brothers. The emphasis had switched to his personal recovery, to his personal comprehension of the cost that position had negatively impacted Kilmer's health, declined dramatically, and as his voice grew increasingly strained, he discovered more difficult to conceal his actual emotions in. He started to release memoirs and interviews, discussing the negative aspects of playing Batman, the physical and mental costs that few might have predicted that I would play. But I never saw Batman in a suit, he remarked. Played Bruce Wayne, but I was never able to perform. All that mattered was who he truly was. The world's most famous brand is the suit wanted to see, but I ultimately lost myself within it. This was the main source of the anguish that position. That ought to have given him more, solidifying his position as one of Hollywood's. Instead, greats had made him feel as though merely a vessel, an icon's mannequin, a live representation of the humanity that had been peeled away gradually with each frame taken. And Kilmer's condition deteriorated. His once idolescent fans started to view him differently, not simply as the man with the cowl and cape, however, as someone who had to pay for. The fact about that legacy was that he wasn't. The invincible Batman they had was longer, believed that he was a frail guy fighting disease, battling the burden of his history, and the decisions he had made. Kilmer's candor regarding his encounter struck a chord with many people. His choice to discuss the psychological and physical effects of his tenure as Batman introduced a more profound. His legacy has a layer that wasn't characterized by the neon lights flashing or the Batmobile's roar was characterized by the man with the mask was not human. He was more than just a superhero. Frank and open. Despite Kilmer's, his impact grew quieter, remained strong. His candor regarding the playing Batman induced agony discussions regarding the negative aspects of renown, the demands placed on performers, and the price of memorable roles. Several admirers who had grown up with Batman, played by Kilmer, started to see him in a not the same light as the figure that stood firm against the evildoers of Gotham, yet as somebody who had given up his own health for a segment that required more than he could provide. And despite Kilmer's, the trip was challenging, and it was also a path of atonement that he underwent. Learn about the price of fame for symbols, of being transformed into emblem. But he had also arrived at comprehend himself in ways that many. He had become more than others could ever be. He had evolved into a guy who was more than just Batman. Despite everything, they had managed to, regardless of how difficult it may be, say the truth. Was when Val Kilmer was facing the last portions of his life, the lessons he learned. Batman's health decline over the years. Challenges. One thing remained indisputable. His legacy extended beyond his roles. He performed a scene on screen that dealt with the truth that he discovered in the quiet. That in all honesty, he exposed the bravery to confront not only the world's aspirations, but his personal issues. Like Batman's legacy, Kilmer's would persevere, but ultimately, it wasn't about the bat emblem on his chest, which was related to the man's strength after wearing it and the susceptibility that accompanied narrating his tale while stating, "This is my true self." What does Kilmer's experience teaches us about the hidden sacrifices made for the characters we look up to? Leave a comment with your ideas. Thank you for viewing, and I'll see you down the following one.